You will not be capable of exiting the toxic relationship or maintaining the social boundary if you don't genuinely care about yourself and genuinely love yourself. That's a really provocative statement, but I want to take the time to explore this with you. I'm trying to do something important that I don't see very often in the conversation around boundaries and toxicity, which is the obvious truth from my perspective that you do not establish a boundary unless there is a territory, an identity, or a possession that you want to defend. You don't build a wall around something unless there's something that's actually there in the first place, and something that you really care about. Think about countries, think about families, think about even a museum with an artifact. You don't protect unless you care. No matter how many structures, no matter how many conversational tactics I could give you, or anyone really, I've seen this unfortunately happen time and time again as people are exiting and then re-entering and then exiting and then re-entering these toxic situations. Doesn't need to be abuse, it can just be a really misaligned acquaintance who asks too much of your time. You will continue to give them your time and your energy if you don't genuinely want to hold on to that, because you know it's worth more than what you're giving. To put it in a single sentence, I need you to love yourself at the deep level of self-compassion and self-respect, wedded together as the masculine and feminine principles of loving, until we can even have the conversation about exiting a toxic relationship. It seems counterproductive. Why would we need to go all the way into the theory and the philosophy to get to something which should be as obvious as blocking their number, moving out, or maybe even flying halfway across the world? It's just not that simple, because I want you to escape that cycle of disappointments and disillusionments and this very strange spiraling around the same kind of energy in just a different set of clothing with a different face and name, the same boyfriend, the same girlfriend, the same colleague, and the same workplace, just cycled and cycled and cycled. We need to break the pattern. So, where do we begin? I'm going to make this very practical, but let's start with today's inner work question from Sonic Druid. And I've actually done something quite cheeky here, which is I have taken this question and turned it all the way around because, well, you're going to see why I've done this. So Sonic Druid asked, for those of us with a history of trauma, which originates within a relational context, which means two people or maybe multiple people, how can we learn to feel safe in our bodies again while at the same time being in connection with others? I have been healing on a somatic and psychological level for a few years now, but I'm still finding it difficult to create intimate and trusting friendships. Thanks for reading. Well, I do enjoy reading, and I enjoyed reading this comment, even if I'm going to potentially upset Sonic Druid by not actually talking about the intimate and trusting friendships, because I do not believe that we can build a roof on a house until we've got a foundation, and the foundation needs to be unshakable, unquestionable, irrevocable self-love. It's not even worth me having a 20-minute discussion with you on this topic. There is nothing more than I can say than caring about yourself enough to actually defend your time and energy. We can move towards the conversation about trusting and intimate friendships when you already have a good understanding of what you're worth. If you don't understand what you're worth, and if you don't have the conviction at a deeper unconscious level to defend what you're worth, you'll give yourself away. You'll give your time to the person who asks just to pick your brain. You'll give your body to the attractive stranger who says a nice thing or two, and you will give all of your life force repeatedly until death brings you into the shadows to people who are simply not deserving, unless you realize that you're worth protecting. Ideally, we would have grown up in family environments where we were given examples and repeated reinforcement from both father figures, and say a father figure, a mother figure, and the father and mother figures in the outer environment. I don't actually think it does too well if we have just two father figures or just two mother figures. A young child needs many fathers and many mothers out there in the environment. It doesn't matter what the gender orientation may be. It could even be a strange situation with a single dad and a best friend who live together and they both look after the child. It's fantastic, and that child hopefully will still do really well with that love, but we need men and women who are loving to give loving impressions on a child who is impressionable. We need a village to raise a child, ultimately. And if we didn't have that situation, we feel like the lump of coal rather than the diamond, which, honestly, is not a feeling that anyone wants to have, and yet it's the unconscious belief that many of us carry. If we don't care about ourselves, and if we don't feel safe in our body because we haven't done the trauma work, that's another layer of corruption on top of an already misdirected and falsely corrupted identity structure. We're just gonna stay in a toxic friendship. I'm gonna frustrate anyone who's watching this video because I'm not saying these are the 5 things that you say to get out of the toxic friendship. These are the 3 ways that you can cut off the narcissist. This is how you distance yourself from your family and never hear from those abusive people again. It's just not the conversation that we need to have. I will say it again with one more example. I have worked with people who are going through divorces, people who are going through separations from romantic partners, and people having very difficult conversations with very close friends and family members. And when I'm working with them in session, there is no use me giving them the literal things that they need to do on that day to get themselves out of the situation, because they will come back 1 week or 1 month or maybe even 1 year later unless they've changed the momentum of devaluing themselves and turned it towards the momentum of actually valuing themselves. When they've made that direction shift, they can form the boundary. A boundary need not be a stone wall and a medieval moat. It can be a force field. It's actually the most common imagery that I give to any client that I'm working with. It's an energetic force field where only love may enter and only respect may enter, and anything else simply gets vaporized. Not necessarily that the abusive partner gets vaporized or the arrogant acquaintance who wants too much of your time suddenly disappears into particles, but they can't come through. Maybe you want to vaporize them, I don't know, you could be resentful in that way, in which case, that's your choice. But you create the force field where you only allow an inner circle who have the same energy that you want to have more of, which ideally, if you've done your trauma healing, is a loving and compassionate and expansive energy. How do you maintain a social boundary? You need to be in the right social context, and you also have the feeling of being able to boundary against difficult and wonderful circumstances. It takes a whole new situation when we're looking at very positive social relationships. What happens when a situation gets perhaps too positive? Well, potentially you end up with codependent dynamics. When someone feels so nourishing to be around, and you don't have a boundary against that form of attachment, you can give up your whole life and attach around a certain person and not realize just how much of your own value you've actually, again, once more, given away. You've self-betrayed yourself at both ends of the spectrum without the healthy ability to identify, define, protect, and defend. You will give away in light situations and give away in dark situations in a disproportionate sense. Bit of an oversimplification in regards to light and dark, but you know what I'm talking about. It's when you've got a friend that you really love spending time with, and it may genuinely be nourishing to spend 3 hours a day with them, but there's something else that you should be doing. You can spend 3 hours a day with them, maybe for a few days in a row, and then take some time for yourself and do the thing that you're meant to be doing, or maybe once a week, maybe in a more intentional way. It gets more and more complex as you really tap into that feeling of value and inner worth. It's not necessarily the direction of this video because it will start to get muddier and muddier. But if you have compassion and you have respect, you will not need me to give you any particular strategy of exiting the toxic situation because you will fucking know. It doesn't take much. Very, very rarely is it ever more difficult than literally leaving. If your husband or your wife is abusing you, and you suddenly realize, I am gold, and I am worthy of respect, you just leave. It just stops making sense in the same way that you wouldn't go out into the rain, naked, and spend 5 nights in that state of shivering cold when there's literally a home with heat and a blanket that's free for you to use, unless you're a complete fucking masochist. You wouldn't do that because you care about yourself and it hurts. And when you realize how much it's hurting and how much you're deserving of a much more loving experience, you won't stay in experiences or energetic relationships where you are not treated with at least the 80% experience of love. Realistically, humans are messy and diverse creatures. In the close friendships I hold, for example, I try and maintain a loving, connective, creative, and inspirational energy, but occasionally, because I'm a human, I may be a bit rude, I may be a bit cold, I may make a comment that actually leans towards anger and punishment rather than expansion and celebration, but that should be the minimal amount of texture. The majority should be love and respect, and then I will get that in return from the well-discerned friendships. I think the point's clear. How do you exit a toxic friendship, and how do you maintain a social boundary? You have an identity, a possession, or a territory. All three of those identity, possession, and territory qualities are you, and you defend them. And once you are willing to defend and you have the courage and the conviction to follow through on your defensive core right to enjoy living as someone who's treated well, you will leave the situation. And I hope this helps. Next video in the series, we're going to be addressing another equally charged topic. I'll see you over there.